Hello, I'm the UK Angry Atheist. Today I'd like to begin the first of a two-part series I want to do about the compassionate and caring nature of God. I intend to do this by exploring my own experience of God's compassionate and caring nature, and I'd like to share with you my experience of my father's death in 2011 at the age of 86. And as importantly, his illness prior to his death. To tell you a little bit about my father, he was born in 1925 and he was born in Salford, which is near to Manchester in northwest England. He was born into a working class family, a fairly poor family, and in fact he often used to tell me that he went to school with children who couldn't afford shoes. I think when he was a child there was a real concern about becoming ill and unable to work because there was no social security or benefit, and basically people could virtually starve. So he had quite a hard, tough upbringing. He left school at 14 and what he did then was he went into mechanical engineering and became an engineering craftsman. He served an apprenticeship. He was married at 25, and in fact here's a photograph of my mother and father on the wedding day. My parents had two children. I'm the youngest of two sons, and most of their married life was spent in Little Hulton, which is a district on the outskirts of Salford, and we were brought up on a large sprawling council estate, my parents paying rent to the local council for the house. So again, a very working class upbringing. My father, in spite of his background, was self-educated and he loved books, reading, learning. He highly prized education. He loved classical music, and I have fond memories of my brother, myself and my father going to the Halley Orchestra in Manchester, at the Free Trade Hall, and then later at Bridgewater Hall. He also enjoyed current affairs. He liked to watch the news and documentaries, had a real interest in science, and he had a great sense of humour. He used to like Fawlty Towers in particular. That was one of his favourite programmes, and on the one hand I've seen him cry tears at a beautiful piece of music that the Halleys played, and I've equally seen him cry tears because he's laughed so hard at Basil Fawlty's antics on Fawlty Towers. Unfortunately, around 10 years ago my father started to show memory problems. Here's a photograph from around that time on his 80th birthday. Slight to begin with, he would forget things and struggle to learn new things. We bought him a camera for his birthday and he just couldn't get the hang of it. And because I'd worked with people with dementia in a day hospital, I was quite attuned to that and started to suspect that he was beginning to develop a dementia. On my behest, he eventually agreed to go to his GP, and a series of tests and brain scans were undertaken, and it was discovered that he actually had developed an Alzheimer type dementia. This was crushing really for me because I fully understood what the implications of that were. For people who are unfamiliar with dementia, you tend to think that it's just forgetting things and becoming a little bit disorganised, and you know it's quite amusing, but in actual fact it's not. It starts, as it started with my father, with slight forgetfulness and difficulties in little things that involved complicated learning, but then it progresses and the impairment becomes greater until people end up incontinent, unable to communicate verbally, and living in a state of fear quite often. I would see people in the day hospital who were totally disorientated and panicking. You know, I used to think you could imagine it being dropped into a strange country where you couldn't really understand what people were saying to you, perhaps being dropped in the middle of Moscow, you know, without any warning and not knowing where you were, not being able to fully understand what people were trying to say to you, and the panic that would ensue. And of course, people often go way back in time, so you'd have people who attended the day hospital saying they wanted to go home and see the mother, even though these people were 80, 90-year-old. Quite awful illness. From my dad's diagnosis to his death was a period of approximately 7 years, which is fairly typical for Alzheimer's disease, as I understand it. And in that time, he experienced the fairly typical steady decline, bit by bit losing more and more function, more and more of his faculties. And that's particularly hard for my father because he was quite proud of the fact that he was a rational, thinking person, that he could pick things up. You know, when computers became more mainstream, he was really interested in that. And for him to lose that mental faculty, he found very difficult at first. He had to give up driving, which he found incredibly difficult. And bit by bit, it robbed him of his dignity. He became a changed person. He started wandering at night. My mother, who was his main carer, who he lived with, for a couple of years, she barely got a full night's sleep because my father would be up wandering around and she'd have to go down and see what he was doing, try and coax him back to bed. He'd sometimes be angry because he couldn't understand why she was mithering him, why did she want him to go to bed. Here's a photograph of him approximately 2 years before he died, and if you compare that to the photograph previously, around the time of his 80th birthday, you can see the decline. Dementia really is an evil illness. If you've had no experience of it, you can't imagine what it does to a person, how it destroys them. It destroys the essence of them as a person. My mother said my father became like a stranger, she didn't know him any longer. So it wasn't just what it did to my father, in actual fact, it was what it did to my mother, it was what it did to all of us watching that happen to my father, watching him disintegrate, to the point where he became very frail. He fell, broke his hip and had to go into residential nursing care, basically confined to a bed, with muscles contracted quite horribly because he couldn't understand the exercises they're trying to give him to do, and in quite a lot of pain, I think, most of the time. And really, I don't understand, if God's good and compassionate, why my father deserved that end, and why we all deserved to watch him suffer like that. Why does anybody deserve that? And I know it's not just with dementia, there's all sorts of things, starving children, there's all sorts of things you can look at and say, well, why is God fair and compassionate if he allows these things to happen, these evils? But I'm talking from my own experience here, and that's my father. I'd like to pose this question, which was posed by Epicurus over 2,000 years ago. If God is willing to prevent evil, but not able, then he's not omnipotent. Is he able but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? If he is neither able nor willing, then why call him God? And that's my question to you. Why is there such suffering in the world? Why does God permit it? If he is good, compassionate, kind, if he loves us, why does he do this to people? Next time I want to cover more fully my dad's final death, and I want to tell you about why I blame Christianity for that, really, or Christians to be more accurate. he didn't have a good end, and if you watch the next video you'll understand just how horrific this illness can be and how the injustice of it can be compounded by what well-meaning Christians and other religious people do and say. Thank you for watching.